So cool, so cool. Yeah. So much more to see, yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. We'll get rolling here. Welcome to Rivers of Alabama. I see a lot of familiar faces. Some are doing remedial work, some are first time. But this is the fourth go of this. And what I was amazed when I got sent the roster is that there were 55 people signed up. That is plus or minus about 2 from all 4 times it's been taught. I don't know what there is about 55, but you know, there's always 55 people. But I'm Bill Deutsch and real happy to have you. We want to, as I've seen in all the classes, especially welcome anyone new to Ali. Is anyone here brand new? Welcome very much. Welcome. And the veterans can maybe give an extra welcome at break. So we will begin. Just to go through a little bit of housekeeping, we will always be keeping this informal. That is, if you have a question or a contribution, you know, please feel free to just raise your hand, and I'll either repeat the question, or that's probably the easiest way than trying to get you a mic. But please project it if you do have a question or a comment. And we will always take a 10, 15-minute break. And that would be a great time right after break for us to have a little more of a discussion time. That is, if something of the morning or the readings or whatever spurred something in your mind. I'll always give opportunity when we regather for that time. And particularly this year, as we'll see, it's the first year in the 4 of Rivers of Alabama where there is an optional book. So that'll, I hope, give us a little more time to either you will have read it before class or after class. And there could very well be questions or light bulb moments, you know, where you have things you'd like to share. I'm hoping that we have folks here that have river stories and memories from all of our major basins. I don't know. We'll probe that a little bit later as we learn about the basins in Alabama. But in years past, there's always been great lore and memories and good river talk from folks that remember growing up on this creek or that creek or being on the big rivers. And so I'll just give you a little bit of my personal background. You may have gathered from my speech, ain't from around here, only 33 years in Auburn, but I grew up in western New York on the Great Lakes. They mean a lot to me. I lived very close to the Genesee River in Rochester, New York, and spent a lot of time on the Finger Lakes, Lake Ontario, and still go up every summer to teach in Michigan, on Lake Michigan, Superior, and the Great Lakes really draw me. But after leaving New York, after graduate school, I took my first real job as an aquatic ecologist in Pennsylvania and worked on the largest river on our east coast of the U.S., which is the Susquehanna River. Starts in around Cooperstown, New York, crosses the Pennsylvania border, makes a U-turn, goes back up into New York, comes back down through and ends in Chesapeake Bay. Huge system, part of the Chesapeake, and cut my teeth there in fish and bugs and water quality and all of that. But as this picture might denote, I just found this old slide. This is from about 1973. I was one of the divers in our ecological impact study lab, and it's a little washed out, you know, ectochrome wears out, but that is ice. And we did a lot of dives year-round, and that was about 40 minutes on 0-degree water on the bottom with near zero visibility. And the look just kind of said it all, you know. Time to move to Alabama. But the other thing that inspired my move to Auburn School of Fisheries where I retired in 2013 and have kept working part-time there. So I've been there about 30-some years. But it was back in these days when we were just filling the journals with all kinds of articles about rivers and the biota, describing new species, life histories, and all of that, that the rivers were still degrading. And my neighbors didn't have a clue to what I was doing. And my family, you know, even my kids were knee-high then. And just a quick remembrance that just hit me. Somewhere in the second grade or thereabouts, you're supposed to draw a picture of what your dad does. And they came home, and one year my daughter had a stick person fishing off of a dock. And I thought, that's what you think I do all day, because I mentioned fisheries, you know. And then a year later, the younger sister went, and she brought back her picture, and I was on the back of a fire truck. And I said, Mindy, what is this all about? I have no idea what you do. I had to make something up. The other kids all knew what their dad did, you know, so that's the life of an aquatic ecologist. But anyways, what my revelation was, which is in the preface of the book, was, you know, good science alone is not enough to save the planet, right? And that's kind of an eye-opener. You know, scientists kind of get heady about things, like they think if you make enough discoveries, you know, everybody gets it, and it moves into policy, and the world becomes a better place. Wrong. You know, science and good ideas are one of the least marketable things anymore. But so, in other words, engagement of the public, awareness, and using head and heart and hands to really grasp amazing and important concepts about life on Earth, and what we drink, and, you know, what we eat and breathe, and all this wonderful creatures around us. It doesn't come only through science. We really need discussion and outreach and education and awareness. And so when I came to Auburn and finished up my studies, I was fortunate enough to be offered a grant to start the Alabama Water Watch program, which is a community-based water monitoring and watershed awareness and stewardship program. And we've been doing that now going on 27 years, reached over 300 community groups in Alabama. And that allowed me to travel many thousands of miles around the state, and most importantly, to hear from local folks about the creek they love, the lake they love. And I got out on that water and heard their stories, and often they were multi-generational. And so all those things started to build up, and eventually they kind of spilled out into this book. Another thing that's acknowledged in what led up to the Alabama Rivers book was, during our Water Watch years, we published 5 little booklets, 16-pagers, citizen guides to Alabama rivers. And these are still available. I just point that out to you. If you go to alabamawaterwatch.org, and then from our homepage, you go to resources, this button here, and publications, you can download. Those are all on PDF form. So they're free, and you can read it. However, let me just say, they form the core of part 2 of the Alabama Rivers book. So they're all about 10 to 15 years old now. They're out of print. And that was another impetus for putting this together. The book was published just about 6 months ago. So part 2 is really a synopsis and an updating and expansion of that. However, the book is optional, and if you're just curious or would like a shorter version of it, these guides are there for the taking, you know, online. So you have been sent the syllabus. I hope you all got that. And hard copies were available at the desk. Did you get those? They were, okay, very good. They were in the envelope. So you have a little handout that we'll use today for a small small exercise because we're going to start off with a bang. We're going to, do the real broad brush about our state and its mighty rivers. And I got to thinking, I take them for granted maybe, or maybe you do if you know Alabama rivers. But if somebody asked me today, well, tell me about the rivers of South Dakota or the rivers of Vermont or the rivers of Utah, I would be at a total loss. I may vaguely remember hearing about one or the other. So there's no shame in not knowing our rivers, even if you're an Alabamian. But I hope that by the end of the day, that carved up basin map you got on your handout, it's like a side of beef, where the pork chops are and the tenderloin and all that, that you will have a general grasp of about 10 of our major basins. And we'll even discuss what is a basin, what is a watershed, what is a stream. So we'll have a little bit of that. Now, again, in years past, we have had optional field trips. And in fact, I've already got an email in with Allie Sorley, who she is the education coordinator of the Alabama Museum of Natural History in Tuscaloosa. So we've had field trips there. It usually involves a caravan, of 3 or 4 of us driving with 2 or 3 or 4 in the vehicle. And it's a day trip. We usually do it on an off-Ollie day, Thursday or Friday typically. And so we are tentatively looking at the 9th of March. I haven't heard back from her yet, but and there's other options too. And I can always make connections for you to visit on your own. We typically get a little more behind the scenes kind of stuff, although the museum itself is fabulous. And we'll bring home some of the things we talk about in class. The other thing we've occasionally done is optional, of course, float trips. And I have floated various creeks around here, the Chewacla, Eufabi, the Salgahatchee. There's a lot of half-day floats, and some of you are adventurous enough to jump in. And so give it a month or so when things start to warm up and bud out a little bit. It's gorgeous to spend some time on our streams. There's a great float on the Tallapoosa River below the Tallahassee Falls down to the 229 bridge. It's about a 4-hour float, gorgeous float. Goes right by the creek capital, Tuckabashie, where the Eufabi Creek enters the Tallapoosa River. Very historical site, very beautiful. So anyways, those may be more one-on-one, or you just say, hey, I got a kayak, or I need a kayak, or whatever. I have 3 or 4, and I have a 2-person, and I have a canoe, and so it could be something we think about. So, as mentioned, this is the first time being able to teach Rivers of Alabama with the book, which I hope is a great aid to all of us. You'll see, even if you've taken a peek at it already, that we won't have enough time to cover every little thing. In other words, we'll still be scanning and doing a survey, so to speak, of the book. But I'd encourage you, if you have it, to take a peek at the chapters. On the syllabus is chapter, for each of the 7 sessions that we'll have, and we'll kind of walk you through the book. And but as I say, there'll be more there that may inspire some of your questions and comments, or lunchtime talk, or whatever. So the Rivers of Alabama book, as I mentioned, came out in June, and it's been a great experience for me. It was blood, sweat, and tears doing it, about 5 years. But the Ollie is acknowledged. You folks in a previous life, last year and the year before, and so on. The questions, the materials you brought me, the good discussions we had really helped to set the tone, find the voice, the audience, and speak. If you're an author, you might have all kinds of good ideas in your head rattling around, but getting them down in some sort of flow is quite challenging. Then I would certainly acknowledge Ollie and being able to do this with you these previous 3 years and now to being a major impetus for writing it. And the other big one, happy birthday, Alabama. This is our bicentennial year. So it's pretty special. And what's amazing is you may know our very own homegrown Jay Lamar. She grew up in Auburn and worked at Pebble Hill for a number of years, and then she got dinged by the governor in 2014 to become the director of the Bicentennial Commission. So Jay commutes to Montgomery every day, and we've been friends for some years. But what struck me is if you look at the Bicentennial Commission goals, if you cook it down, this is verbatim from what is in their literature, the bicentennial goal is to encourage communities, schools, businesses, and cultural institutions to use this time of commemoration and explore and showcase our history, not only a looking back, but a looking forward. And I think that's very good. But as I read that, and as I said in the intro of the book, it's impossible to meet that goal without consideration of the vital role rivers have played. I really don't think, we've got some new books on Alabama out there, and we got a reprint of Wayne Flint and Leah Rawls Atkins' Alabama book, and there's some other historical books, but to me, and this is an ecologist speaking, some historians need to get out a little more. They write great stuff. There's lots of stories. There's lots of wars and treaties and political fights and all that. And it's like, hello, we're standing on the natural resource base. And before you get out of this class, if you don't know one other thing, you are going to know that Alabama is the river state, okay? There's so much flowing water in this state, and it is so amazingly diverse, biologically, physically, chemically, and it just drove, our history and our culture. And we're going to jump right in with that this morning. So that's really one of our main class goals, not only the class 1 here, but the whole course is, if somebody says, well, what'd you learn there? I want you to just say, Alabama's a river state. And we can go from there. So anyways, we'll just, as I say, jump right in, and following the syllabus and the chapters of the book, I've switched a few things. If you've been here previous years, this usually comes a little bit later. However, in writing for all Alabamians, if I start out with fish and turtles and all that, the eyes will glaze over, and oh yeah, there goes another ecologist just flapping his jaw. So I start, with our seal, and we're going to talk about that. And then also inspired from previous OLLI courses, people will say, well, I don't know what that term means, and that's cool. That's what we're going to talk about. And I just heard today from a friend, when I looked at the seal of Alabama, I didn't know that those lines were rivers. And that's perfect. Maybe they're highways, maybe they're, trees, maybe, who knows what they are. So, it is true, we've got to really make sure we're speaking the same language. So we're going to do a little bit about terms, just so that the rest, as we read and talk and you hear a word like creek or stream or river, that you kind of know the difference. And in fact, you know that they're all the same. We'll figure that out. So, and we'll also look at our major river basins that are mapped on your first handout. So here we go. All those little black lines, those are rivers. And so maybe that's enough for today. See you all tomorrow. No, but they're named, and it's a very interesting thing. Somebody told me, is Dennis here today? Dennis Drake? Okay. He was on the roster. He told my wife yesterday that a man by the name of David Robb was here at the museum yesterday. And I was just hoping David would be here today, because what's following here really is attributable to David and his work. David is in his 80s. He lives in Huntsville, and he's an art historian, and he is a detective art historian, and he did a lot of what we're going to talk about. And that is, here we are with our state seal, and we kind of ho-hum, you know, when you pump gas, you'll see it on the side of the pump, you say ho-hum, you know, Measures and Standards Department uses it, transportation, you know, economic and community affairs, environmental management. It is our state seal. It's on our stationery. It's you know, it's on official vehicles. So maybe we're immune or numb to it, you know. And now it's time to sit back and say, whoa, we have a river map for a state seal. And what's so incredible about that is this was designed in 1817 by our first governor that actually was a territorial governor before Alabama was even a state. The map on the right was a drawing, a watercolor that William Wyatt Bibb had done when asked by President Monroe to develop a seal or a symbol, an official seal that would represent you, the new state of Alabama, the 22nd state in the Union. So 21 states go before, and go Google it, I did. Look at all the state symbols. They're very similar. You either will have a statesman, a soldier, a farmer, a scholar, a building, a chicken, or something, you know, and it's like Alabama just broke the mold. Number 22, nothing like anything else, and nothing since. We're the only state with a river map for our seal. And Bibb, you know, he just kind of cryptically said, it represents the concerns and interests of our state. And that, you know, because people say, well, how did we get this and why? You know, because it's so different. Why the rivers? Why the rivers? So we'll explore that a little bit. But the one on the left is the original. And believe it or not, that original is still extant. It's in our Department of Archives and History in Montgomery today. And the one on the right, David Robb, the gentleman I just referred to, who lives in Huntsville now, who was here yesterday, wrote an article in Alabama Heritage. And it's a 2014 fall edition, I think. You can easily get to that. And it's called The Invisible Seal Revealed, or something like that. Because after almost 200 years, David went into the archive and found what everyone thought was of just a faded, invisible white circle where the seal used to be. And with technology and other things, he brought it back to life. Just in 2015. It's incredible. Just a few years ago, what we knew as that original here came to be. And it has all kinds of things. We won't take the time to look at every single thing, but I love these bear claws, you know, and Tennessee is upside down. It's almost like those are northerners, you know. In fact, we had a fellow here in our class 2 years ago, and he's from Sheffield, up here at Muscle Shoals. Look at the big shoals there. That was obviously a very important landmark. Well, he told the quick story. He grew up in the Shoals. He came to Auburn for school, and he met a girl from down here in the Wiregrass, and they fell in love. And it came time for him to meet her daddy. And so he comes in, and here's this grumpy old guy with a scowl on his face, and he's shaking in his boots, and the father says, "Where are you from, boy?" And he said, "Well, I'm from Sheffield." "Well, then you're just a damn Yankee," you know. He was born and raised in Alabama, but if you're above the bear claws, you might as well forget it, you know, culturally, historically. But anyway, so much here. Literally, scores of these little tributaries came to life on this seal, and 7 forts were on the original seal, including at our first state capital, St. Stephen's, which is down here on the lower Tombigbee River, and all kinds of things. And 2/3 of the state was Creek and Cherokee. All this land was not the United States of America when that seal was produced. So there's just a very rich history there. And so before I get to my presidential trivia question, let me just say that Bibb sent this drawing to then Secretary of State John Quincy Adams in the nation's capital of Philadelphia. And it was Adams and Bibb that worked together to make the seal. And so, as we know, John Quincy Adams went on to become president later. And so here's your presidential trivia question. What unique attribute do Presidents John Quincy Adams and Donald Trump share? Now, if you haven't heard this, now don't say anything about personalities. It doesn't have anything to do with intelligence or temperament or anything, but something unique, and it holds to today. The two presidents that share one unique attribute. Anybody know offhand? Has to do with their wives. Yes. They are the only two that had foreign-born wives. And Adams' wife was French. Of course, Melania's Hungarian? Where's she from? Melania? Eastern Europe. Wherever, not the U.S. So, anyways, here's an example of what you find in the archives. The seal, the raised seal, tends to have completely faded out. And you know that there was a raised seal there, and that's what Rob grabbed and enhanced through, I don't even know what instruments he used, but he brought it back to life. Interestingly, most Alabamians in these early days, this is a bond from the Civil War. It's an 1861 stock, the $500, kind of pricey there. But the interesting thing about this document, it had the original seal, the one I just showed you, but this seal, which was really our seal on a scroll under a tree, became the one that most Alabamians knew because it was in every school textbook. Most Alabamians were just simple farmers who rarely had official business. They didn't get to see our river map seal that much, but they all knew that, and that became a lot more popular, this one here, than this. But they know this one is based on this. Interestingly, that little dot right there is there. And that's where a surveyor said a bad word, because they were striking the border. Congress had guaranteed that Mississippi and Alabama, that was being carved out of the original territory, would be equal in size. And as they began to run that state boundary, they said, man, you know what? If we keep going, Alabama's going to be bigger. This little wedge is going to make them a whole lot bigger, and those Mississippian folks are going to be so mad. And so they changed their angle right there and struck that line. And there's an interesting book that Bill Sherling loaned me, How the States Got Their Shapes. And if you want a good read, you look at the states, all of our states, and, well, how did they get that little squiggler? Why is that there? It's in that book, and it explains that. And then when they got up to the top, it doesn't show in this map, but you may remember there's a little dog ear of Alabama up there. And you think, well, why the heck is that little notch? And it's because when they restruck the line, they hit the Tennessee River before they hit the north boundary of Alabama. So Mississippi said, hey, you take that little corner, because the sheriff is never going to have to row across the river to break up some drunken brawl. You just take that little corner. So that's how we got our shape. It's so interesting. The east boundary is even a little more so with our disputes with Georgia, but that's another story. It just is a really, really neat thing that, to ponder how a state made these political decisions and ended up with the seal we got. However, as described, come 1868, we lost that seal. And I'm reading now a book. It's actually the new biography on Frederick Douglass, and it's just getting into post-Civil War era. And we all know Reconstruction was kind of an ugly period. But be that as it may, the river map seal was taken away, and Alabama was given this seal, kind of a welcome home, get with the program kind of seal. Like, forget these rivers. You got to have an eagle and a banner, and be more American or whatever. But we ended up with this seal for 70 years. We actually had this seal longer than the original. But up in the let me back up. In the early 1930s, there was a couple of women that wrote the words and composed the music to a song called Alabama. And it was finally adopted by the legislature in 1931. If you look at this song, you will see, I think, 6 of our main rivers. The Tennessee, this is the first stanza. Broad thy stream whose name thou bearest, you know what river that is. That's the Alabama River. The Bigbee, what's that one? Tombigbee. And then Coosa Tallapoosa and the Warrior. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of our major rivers in our song. I haven't found any historical documents that would even lend this thought, but it occurred to me, what was the impact of that song with, in the first 2 verses, just river, river, river? Was there a growing consciousness about our identity as a state, what it means to be an Alabamian? Because, within less than a decade, the river map seal was restored through a campaign in the late 30s. So by 1939, we had it back. And we're the most magnanimous state in the Union. We mentioned 4 other states on our state seal. What's with that, But we ended up putting our neighbors on it. But all those rivers stayed. And then in the 50s, it was colorized to the version we have today. So that's kind of the story. And if anybody doesn't think rivers are a vital part of our identity and culture and history, just look at the seal. You don't have to even go to the river. But I think it gives us something to start thinking about, maybe set the stage for all of that. And so, we've gotten a little bit about the history of it, and there's a good bit more. I just gave a book talk, by the way, at the Tallapoosa Historical Society. And, of course, today we call it Tallapoosa. And they have a double S, double E. And on the original seal, it was the Tallapoosa River. The river we call Black Warrior today, when it came back on the original seal, it was called the Tuscaloosa River. And the Creek word Tuscaloosa means Black Warrior. So there were some linguistic things, some political things, names changed, Cahaba changed to Cahaba, things like that. And it's more rich, and really if you get into the history of it. But the features, being really special among all the seals before and after, and the meaning. Now, briefly on the meaning, Bibb just said, this represents the concerns and interests of the state. And what did he have in mind? Because, when I look at it, or maybe we could even ask, when you look at the seal, what does it say to you? Or what should it say to you? And, of course, moderns might think it means kayaking or bass tournaments or something, Believe me, Bibb wasn't thinking that, right? So what was Bibb thinking about? What were the original settlers thinking about? What about all those in between them and us? Because it has come to mean a lot of things, navigation, irrigation, flood control, bass tournaments, hydropower, barge traffic, commerce, drinking water, and on and on and on. So it's thought by some that Bibb was more of a thinking about livelihoods, as well he should have as our first governor. We'll see that when the Federal Road was opened up shortly after Thomas Jefferson bought the Louisiana Purchase, they punched a road to New Orleans from Georgia. They cut across Alabama, and it inspired Alabama fever. the population of Alabama went up more than tenfold between 1810 and 1820. So right at statehood, there was this flood of European American settlers, and some think Bibb was saying, you come here and you see these lines, most of them end right there. And what does that mean? That means you come here, you got fertile bottomland for your cotton, and you have got a superhighway system to get that out to world markets without crossing another state line. No tariffs. You know, you live here, you can get here. You live here, you can get here. You know, 2/3 of our state can get there. And from there, you're in Boston, you're in Washington, you're in Paris, you're in London, and you're making good scooch on cotton. And that's what a lot of people think that was in the head of our original governor, because they were the superhighways of the day. You know, there were no railroads, there were no major highways as we think of them. And for Native Americans and for early Americans, rivers were it for their economy. Yes?
We were in Decatur, Alabama, last weekend, and there's a whole new system to the trailers here. They got them all to Decatur and put them on barges. Because like you said, there were no railroads, there were no highways, and that's how they transported them out west, which I thought was really cool.
I've just learned that myself, and it was amazing. You would have Creek women in bonnets and big flowing dresses, look for all the world like, you know, an antebellum belle, and getting on with their mother's china and tablecloths in chests. You know, we think of, you know, loincloth and, you know, very primitive people walking. I mean, they used ferries, especially the women and children. Often the men were made to walk. But yes, they actually were removed. The removal era of the 1830s in particular were done largely by rivers also. So, and yes, that's right. Yeah. Yes. Right. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, yeah. So rivers have been very, very important. And just one last thing, it's the final paragraph of that chapter, and I got it from my daughter who lives in Montgomery. When I was writing this chapter, she said, you gotta talk to my friend who teaches 4th grade, because she has got a knee-slapping story about the Alabama seal. And the whole idea was this 4th grade teacher in that unit of Alabama history assigned her students to go find a picture of the Alabama seal, because she knew it would be on all these state agencies and symbols and in any way, shape, or form, state, stationary, whatever. So the next day, all the kids had their different pictures, and one had the note from home. And the mother of the child said, we have looked for hours for the Alabama seal, and we really don't think that such an animal exists. And would you please accept a picture of a river otter in its place? So you just picture this little kid coming home, Mom, we got to find an Alabama seal. You know, seal, I didn't think they lived here. And so, you know, what I thought was a little extra humorous twist was, you know, a misunderstanding still goes back to the river. They sent in a picture of a river otter. So there he was. He looks kind of, I get an otter that comes to my pond out here in Lochapoka, and you've probably seen a river otter. They look very much like a seal. They behave like a seal. And he eats bass in my pond like a, but anyways, that was kind of the funny side of that. So I want to take a break in about 5 minutes. I like to go for about 45 and then take a 10-minute break and take about an extra, the final half hour. So again, if you have like these good comments and questions, we'll do that right after break. But to take us to break, I just wanted to give one slide here about regional identity. And I remember in the 1990s, there was a flurry of books about sense of place, and it just had to do with our, deep down identity, like who we are. How many native-born Alabamians in the room? Okay, so I would guess a little less than half. And how many north of the Mason-Dixon line? Almost the same. So, okay, so, the point being that our surroundings, obviously our people, our landscapes, our food, our music, largely defines who we are. If we're away from home, we get homesick. We miss mama's fill in the blank, food. Or we just always remember that tree changed colors, or the snow was this deep by such and such a time or not, or just local flora, fauna, that you begin to say, that's home. Some even say, like the way we're studying migration of birds or fish, how do they find themselves back in the same tree thousands of miles away? And some say there's even a physical, like when we're born, the iron compounds in our body orient to north, where we're actually drawn in a magnetic field kind of way back home, There's all kinds of things about our identity. So my point is, what is our identity as Alabamians? And so I put up other areas of the world, or of the country. Like if you grew up in New England, just, Rorschach, word association. If you grew up, say, coastal New England, what are, let's just hear 2 or 3 terms. What pops in your mind? Home is? Rocky coasts, okay? Any others? Yeah, you had to talk funny. You can't say car, you got to say ka, Covered bridges, yeah, New England, yep. And, if you go back in history, like if you were in the 4th grade in Maine or Massachusetts, what would you learn about, And you may have read, I said whales, harpoons, salty air, crashing waves, stories of the sea, that's home. So, okay, Midwest. You're out there in Nebraska, Kansas, corn, alfalfa. Huh? Flat, yeah. You can see that sunset and sunrise. Yeah. We've had people move here from the Midwest and they get claustrophobic. There's too many trees. You feel like I can't see for 30 miles. I feel, kind of cooped up. So anyways, the Sioux Nation, the bison, countless herds and prairie and rolling hills. Southwest? Anybody from the Southwest? Desert, cacti, Gila monsters, Apache. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Arizona has like somewhere around less than 20 inches of rain a year. We just had 58, So we often push 60 inches. It's a very wet state. That's why we have so many rivers. But okay, Southwest, and then finally Northwest. You're from out there? Yeah, mountains. Yep, you could be up in the Cascades or the Olympic Mountains, snow-capped, Mount Rainier, huge Sitka spruce trees, mossy, that's part of the Northwest anyways. So I just leave you as we go to break, what if I said Southeast, what do you put there? So, and I would contend that it's piney woods and rivers. I mean, if you talk to anybody, their lore, their childhood, and I've done so in including just last week I was up in Blount County. You want to get to the backside of nowhere, go to Cleveland, Alabama. And boy, do they love their Locust Fork. Oh, and they know every nook and cranny of it, every one of them. And swan-covered bridges and all the history of that part of the Southeast. But so that's just something, again, to layer on the state seal and then just this sense of place. And as I say, you know, how long do you have to listen to country music without hearing about somebody getting drunk or falling in love along a river, right? I mean, it's where you go. And songs of Alabama, the group Alabama, there's one down by the river, Alan Jackson, Chattahoochee. I mean, it's just history, culture, art, poetry. You know, it's just infused in who we are. So we're going to expand on that. We'll let you take a little stretch break. See you in about 10 minutes or so. We'll get cranked about quarter of. Well, we can get started. And I wanted to start you off with, I don't know if you're going to think of it as funny or depressing or both, but I subscribe to The Week. I don't know if you get this little weekly publication, but I really enjoy it. And it's very short articles, international news, national news from maybe 5 different papers, so it covers a big swath of the left to right, political and all that. But it has this neat little section. It was a good week for, and it was a bad week for, right? So this is the most recent issue. Just came out, well, it's dated February 1. We're not even there yet. But it was a bad week for British eels who are becoming hyperactive because of urinated cocaine entering the River Thames through the sewage system, according to new research. Scientists estimate about 80,000 lines of cocaine are entering the Thames per day. And so I said to my wife, what is a line? She said, don't you watch any of these gangster drug movies? The line is where they sprinkle it down and, you know, do the dollar bill rolled up or whatever. And 80,000 lines of cocaine in London alone being peed into the Thames River daily. And now the eels are starting to get a little feisty, you know. So, I mean, again, see, we laugh and then we say, whoa, that's not good news, is it? Because probably London's drinking water is coming from the same place, right? P.S. so is ours, you know. We'll talk about that a little later. I just wanted to use that because it popped off the page when I was reading it this week. But just to point out that, you know, this course, this class, is to get us appreciative and aware about our rivers, but also, as the title says, take the challenge too, you know, because there are challenges. And so, and as the goal of the Bicentennial Commission was not just a feel-good look back on our wonderful history, it's to chart the course for our 3rd century. So just to put that out there in terms of rivers, that will be one of our goals too. And I'd appreciate your thoughts on that as we learn more about rivers. It's an appreciation for all of this rich, wonderful history in our seal and so on, but also what's next. And P.S. we've got pharmaceuticals in our rivers too, detectable, consumed by us daily, and maybe we're wondering why some ailments are popping up or persistently in our society that could be coming via our drinking water. So just put that out there.
Did you tell us that, like Harvey tested positive for Prozac?
Yes. Yes. We had we'll get to that a little bit later, but since you mentioned it, our postdoc in fisheries did his postdoc on pharmaceuticals in our rivers, and he did have active ingredient Prozac about 20 miles downstream of Atlanta. So when you throw in the chemotherapy and birth control and heart medicines and methamphetamines and so on, and mix it all up, make a bunch of whole new stuff that we have no idea what it does. and go from there. I mean, it's just a concern. It's obviously a concern. A lot of our things we put in our water are being treated, thankfully, by our wastewater plants, and other things, even cosmetics and endocrine disruptors, as they say, things that mess with our hormonal system, walk through our wastewater treatment plants. So we have to be aware, not gloom and doom, but eyes wide open and see where we go. But if all those previous pictures of cacti and rocky coast, said, this is who I am, in general, if you travel, this is who you are. I mean, it's just a gorgeous river state. And I add, well, North Alabama, because, the Rocky Bottom streams are mainly limited to, Montgomery North or Auburn North. We'll see as you go south, you're into what we call the coastal plain, which is sandy bottom. Streams are really schizophrenic. A lot of our major rivers cross that line to our coastal plain, and you wouldn't even know they were the same river. They behave very differently. Their flow, their width, their sinuosity, their biota, their substrate, they dramatically change. And it's another just source of the wonderful richness and diversity. But if you go north, this is not an atypical scene. The way these streams move through these microhabitats of pools, runs, and riffles where the water's disturbed, white water. And that's a repeating pool, run, riffle down a stream. And it creates a myriad of habitats, and these different critters will prefer one or the other, often in a very ultra-specific way. And we'll talk about that about the third week. But so here's another kind of interactive time. Again, just as you look at this map, we'll just throw out a few observations here. I'll let you take a few shots, and then I'll give you what I think. So when you look at a map of Alabama, river map, what jumps out at you? They're everywhere, okay? So I really think that one of the first observations is just how stream rich we are. And I think I can not give away, I don't want to give away the answers, but it turns out we have 132,000 miles of streams, recently determined with new GIS and satellite imagery. If you read a document more than about 10 years old, and that includes most that are out there, it'll say Alabama has 77,000 miles of streams. But through some new calculations, and of course there's some judgment calls how much resolution you want on your map. But the U.S. Geological Survey, the Geological Survey of Alabama, and other agencies that are gurus in this stuff have now, agreed that Alabama has 132,000 miles of flowing water. And doing the math, end to end, wrap around the earth more than 5 times. So we are a river state. And there was another comment. Comment? Question? How much hillier? Yes, very much so. You can see a little bit of topography here. This is very flat, and this is very hilly. And this, I don't know, it's somewhat darker. That line right there we'll talk about very soon. But that's the line I'll be referring to as the fall line, where most of our rivers are spilling over that. But yes, and what does hilly mean for a stream? Yeah, a lot more cascades, rapids, riffles, waterfalls, white water. Okay, so lots of streams. Let's flip it on the negative. What don't we have? Water-wise. Lakes. I heard lakes. So you're from Michigan, Wisconsin, New York. Tens of thousands of lakes. Alabama has virtually no lakes. Can you believe that? And no natural lakes, yes. So Lake Florala is on the Florida-Alabama line right here. It's a little dinky sinkhole, you know, a cavern caved in, filled up with water. Okay, there's Lake Florala, big whoop. That's about the only lake, true lake we have. Now, somebody's saying, wait a minute, I just dropped 400 grand on a lake house on Martin or Jordan. Are you telling me I bought swampland in Florida, or what is the deal? They told me it was a lake, you know. And so we'll get into that because they are reservoirs. They are impounded rivers. I call them slow rivers. They're not lakes. And there's a huge difference between a reservoir and a lake. And that's part of our watery terms coming up. Any other observations here? Yeah, Bill? Okay, yeah. This is another thing. Here's the Tom Bigby and the others. And only 2 of these 10 basins that are on your map, the handout, begin and end in Alabama. So most start in another state, that is Tennessee, Georgia, or Mississippi, or start in Alabama and end in Florida. You know, all these coastal plain streams, they're all ending in these embayments here on the Gulf in Florida. So that sets up a lot of water allocation conflict, the so-called water wars, the policies. I was just told by someone in the Geological Survey of Alabama that I probably should word it, and I did, that we have crossed the $100 million mark in legal fights with neighboring states about water, and we still do not have any resolution or any comprehensive water plan in our state. So that's just another one for down the road. I don't want to get into that hornet's nest now. But, okay, as Bill said, most start elsewhere. A lot of streams, more navigable stream miles than any state. And I have to say stream miles because the Great Lakes states will fight you to the mat on that. They have a lot more navigable miles of water, but we're talking about Lake Superior and the other big lakes. So Alabama starts to really, you know, come head and shoulders above the crowd. The other one that I touched on, what you'll see, you know, this line right here, all this land area is draining right there. So that's just another important point, probably what Bibb had in mind when he sent up that river map seal about, you know, the superhighway system of the 1817, 1819 in terms of commerce. So here we are, and quiz time, totally on your own, self-graded. If you want to write on it, you can write on it because you got it digitally. You can print it later. But this is what I gave you in the handout, and we'll just, you know, look at it in terms of the basins. This is the map that's in your book. So I just did this slide last night just to walk us through. So particularly if you haven't had the class before, take your shot. What's number 1? Tennessee, okay. And just a brief comment, Tennessee is one of the main areas, the northern 13% of our state, 15 counties, that does not drain to Mobile Bay, right? It's, what drainage is that? Yes, it's the Mississippi. So when I take teachers right here on this divide between number 3 and number 1, and I say, okay, there's a fire tower up there. It's the highest point on the divide in the Bankhead Forest. Put a foot here, put a foot here. Now, spit and spit, you know. This is going to Mobile Bay, that's going to New Orleans, you know. And you are on that divide, which is pretty humbling to think, you know, it's not the continental divide, but if you went to the Rocky Mountains and straddled the continental divide, you would say Pacific, Gulf of Mexico, you know. So we have to start thinking, what does water do when it falls from the sky and hits the ground? It's going to start moving, either subsurface or surface. And so that's going to be a big thing that we get to, what defines these these watersheds or these large basins, okay? So we'll just move on. Number 2. Okay, I heard it. Tombigbee largely starts in Mississippi, comes across the line, Aliceville. There's a big reservoir there, and moves its way down, picks up a few along the way, and then meets this big old swath here, right about there. But we'll just keep moving on the, as I say, the broad brush. Number 3. Oh, you're good. You're good. That's the one I call the giant left foot stomped on North Alabama. You know, you've got this little valley here, part of the Tennessee, that makes the big toe. The rest of it is just a left foot. Okay, number 4. That's the crown jewel, as some say. More fish species per mile than any river in North America. Very, very beautiful, biodiverse river. Number 5. Okay, that one largely, even has a little piece in Tennessee, but lots of northwest Georgia. This is a hot item, as you might imagine, for the water wars because it straddles that border. And number 6, okay, better know that one. It's where you're sitting. We are in the Tallapoosa Basin. It's the little sister, if you will, to the Coosa because they converge just north of Montgomery and form number 8. But let's do 7 first. Okay, and you can see that that one, you know, forms our border basin-wise. That is, we have a lot of land starting in East Opelika that drains to the south and east. Opelika sits on that divide. So East Opelika is in the Chattahoochee, flows to Holowackie and Uchee Creek, which goes on to the Chattahoochee. And West Opelika is like all of Auburn. It's in the Tallapoosa. So we'll look at a little bit of so-called cultural geography. Why did people build their roads and their towns where they did? And you'll often see they liked the divides. Why? Why do people build on divides of rivers? Do they just want to be cantankerous and stay in water wars for the rest of their life? High ground. It's where you stay out of the bogs and swamps. It's where your wagon can run without getting all stuck. It's where you have the least problem with flooding. You know, so people tend to get high ground. I always thought, you know, I like to personify rivers, you know. And I think, you know, everybody moves the path of least resistance. For a river, that means go low. For a person, that means go high. Because if you stay high ground, you'll have less problems in your life, probably, when it comes to water in the basement or whatever. Malaria or water moccasins or, you know, your wagon up to their hubcaps or whatever. So let's keep moving. Number 8. Okay, now that is the convergence of 5 and 6, right? It's one big stream system some would call the ACT basin. It's this basin right here. It's a hydrologic unit, if you will. It's all connected because when that guy throws fertilizer on his lawn or pees in the river or whatever, it's coming right here, baby. You know, I made one time I got quoted, you know how you never should talk to a reporter, and I made a statement that he put in a raised quote in the article. And it was talking about people in Mobile. Where's Brenda? And I said, you know, it's scientifically demonstrated that every glass of water a Mobilian drinks has already been through 17 toilets, you know. And so they all kind of, you know. But I had a hydrologist come to me afterwards when my department head said, where's your standard deviation on that, Deutsch? You know, he wanted the data. But I was actually told later it's probably a gross underestimate, you know. So, you know, when you think about millions of people here, you know the old Earth Day slogan, we all live downstream, right? So you go out and see my truck, it says, love thy downstream neighbor, you know. Like, let's be considerate of what we're doing because we're drinking what they're putting in and they're drinking what we're putting in. And then it goes to the eels and everybody gets high. So Number 8, we said Alabama. 2 more, 9. Okay. Now these, I call the Mobile Delta rivers. You know, if you go down there on the causeway, there's a beautiful new facility called Five Rivers. And so you got Middle River, and you've got the Tensas River, you got the Mobile River. There's actually, it braids there. Braiding is when a river splits and then rejoins. And it's almost always because of very flat land. There's not enough topography to keep it in a channel. And it'll move around with rain and flooding and drought. So that's a very dynamic area they call the Delta, or the Mobile Tensas Delta, or the Mobile Delta. So I call it the Mobile Delta rivers. And then last but not least, 10, this one is harder. We call it the coastal plain streams. It's actually a number of streams. There's the Chipola, which goes this way. There's the Choctawhatchee, the Conecuh, the Blackwater, the Yellow, the Pea, the Escambia. So there's a whole host, and this is the same color because there's another little coastal plain stream over here that's the Escatawpa River, which is part of the Pascagoula system going down to I guess it goes to Biloxi or to Ocean Springs, one of these embayments down here. You know, it looks to be so minor, but the city of Mobile has their major drinking water reservoir on the Escatawpa. So to them, it's very important. They're not going to drink that 17 toilet stuff. They're going over to the clean side, you know, in the headwaters of this basin. So they got a big drinking water reservoir right there. So that's, you know, kind of a overview. You have the map in your book. It's labeled. You can review or keep it for trivial pursuit in parties and stuff. But watery terms, we'll move through these. You don't have to remember Lodic, but, you know, flowing bodies of water are called Lodic. And the point that's more of a take-home is that all flowing water is called a stream, okay? It doesn't matter if it's that little thing behind your house or the Amazon. Flowing water are streams. So when you hear stream, colloquially speaking, you know, you think of something small, like a creek or a crick or a branch or a fork or a tributary. I even, you ever hear prong? I was just up in Blount County, and one of the tributaries of the Locust Fork is Calvert Prong. It has a huge covered bridge, a very historic covered bridge that goes over the Calvert Prong. So Prong is a stream. All of these, including rivers, we can think of them. So if you hear me say stream, 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 don't think of some little trickle. It could be huge, it could be small. But Lodic is stream, and the counterparts, standing water bodies, are lentic, and these would be, you know, lakes and ponds and wetlands. So just in a nutshell, we won't dwell on lakes because Alabama ain't got none hardly. But, you know, technically speaking, they have a lake has a zone where no sunlight reaches the bottom. It's called an aphotic zone. A pond technically has sunlight throughout. Therefore, they get weedy, you know, sometimes all the way out to the middle. There's no razor edge between lake and pond if, you know, they're natural. A big pond can be bigger than a small lake. It all depends on its depth and its contours and all of that. But just in general, you know, a little bit of info on lakes and ponds. Wetlands, there's so many different kinds. Swamps tend to be dominated by trees, tupelo, gum, and cypress, and it's a tree wetland. A marsh is a grassy wetland. Bogs tend to be very acidic, and so on. So we won't have to get into all the details, but just to throw out some of these terms that might be a little bit confusing. And then we come to this slow river reservoir or impoundments, where a river or a Lodic system has been impounded with a dam. human-made structure. And they are, kind of lake-like and kind of river-like. Their fisheries, their water quality, their hydrology, they're kind of this hybrid. And one of the key things about that, as you'll read, is retention time. Now, what does that mean? Theoretically, how long does all the water in that reservoir stay before it's completely flushed through? And they can do that with dye studies or different measurements of flow and so on. And just to cut to the quick, our largest lake, our largest reservoir or lake in the state is Lake Guntersville. It's 76 miles long. It's huge. It's the first big impoundment of the Tennessee River in Alabama. And its retention time, when you look at a lake 76 miles, you can't even see one end to the other. And you think, wow, what a lake, that's there forever. Every drop of water in that lake is gone through in less than 3 weeks. And in contrast, Lake Superior in the Great Lakes, 1,200 feet deep, has a retention time of 170 years. So retention time is everything, okay? And only one of our reservoirs in Alabama has a retention time that's just barely more than 1 year. And that's Lewis Smith Lake up in Winston and Coleman County. It's an impoundment of Black Warrior River, of the Sipsey Fork to be particular. So virtually all of our reservoirs, including our most voluminous Lake Martin, you can put several of our other reservoirs in Lake Martin. It's very deep and very large, but its retention time is less than 1 year. Why? Because you got that screaming Tallapoosa River blowing right through the middle of it, all the way from Carrollton, Georgia, down through. It's taking on a huge volume of water every day, every day. It's got to go somewhere, or all your lake homes will be flooded out, right? So it's more of a steady state, in, out, in, out. And Martin, it's only about 190-day retention time. So most lakes are in the hundreds of years, or at least scores of years. And that just is a game changer when it comes to the physical, chemical, and biological characteristics of that. So the retention time of our lakes versus a real lake, is quite different, okay? So the other thing, and we'll kind of go out on these terms and call it a day, is watershed. And when I first started reading about this, it said 2% of Americans could define it. The latest document I saw, we're up to 20%. So 80% just say, on watershed, on the Joker said, it's the shed where I keep my water and all that, So what is a watershed? Because it's vitally important that we know what that is. And here is the very, very simple take-home definition written in the book. So for those of you that are taking notes, that's cool. Some of you like to write like I do to get it up in the noggin. But I'm just telling you it's there in writing. But if we think of it as just land area that drains to a common point, it's kind of a revelation to some people because they were thinking water, water, water. But watershed is in reference to land. Okay, so we'll look at this diagram in a little more detail, but that red dash line is the high ground. It's the ridge line that defines if the rain goes this way or that way, right? So that is the boundary. Whenever you see a boundary of a basin or a watershed, it's going to be high ground where the water divides. Some goes this way, some goes that way. So it's the land area inside that red dash line is the watershed that drains to where? That common point, going into Howe Sound, right there. So if you stood on a point and said, even in your backyard, that's an interesting exercise, by the way. Go home and say, okay, here's my house. What watershed am I in? What is the land area that drains to me, to my yard? Or better yet, where my yard is in this grander Tallapoosa Basin. What does that mean? So we'll get into that more and more, but there's nothing magical about water, you know, unless it's under pressure, it won't go uphill. You know, that's why you put big water towers in Auburn, so it goes down and comes uphill to your second-story bathroom, but that's a natural setting. Water just follows gravity, right? It always seeks the easiest way to flow downhill, and that's defined by our topography. And as was pointed out, we're very topographically diverse and rich, so our rivers are, you know, going every which way, but they're not flowing irrationally or against the laws of nature or gravity. They're all just flowing downhill, and that makes for an interesting shape of a watershed. Now, watersheds can be natural, like I was talking about the large dashed line, but you can have a watershed to this dam. Okay, here's an arbitrary, I put a dam on that river, like Lake Martin. Now, what is the catchment or watershed of Lake Martin? It's going to be a subset of the bigger one, right? It's going to be the small dotted line. That's the land area that drains to that point. So you can make the point. You can say the point is where I'm standing or my yard, and why am I getting flooded or whatever. You can do a catchment. I built a pond in my yard, and I got out my topo maps, and I realized I have 80 acres coming to me. And so I know it's catchment. And if you're building a pond, I know the volume of the pond. If I know the catchment and the rainfall, I know how many times that pond flushes a year. You know, if you're into ponds, you got to know that kind of stuff. Because otherwise, you fertilize it or you lime it, and it's all for naught, because the next 2-inch rain, it's all gone. So you size your pond to your watershed, if you're building. That's another topic. But just to point out the natural and arbitrary, if you will, subjective watershed. So the other big thing is watersheds are nested. So the smaller, like this one, is contained in this one. And the analogy would be like the stack bowls in your cupboard. The custard bowl in the cereal bowl, in the salad bowl, in the punch bowl. So you fill up the little one, it's going to spill into the progressively larger one. And the big ones, the larger ones, we tend to call basins, okay? So again, just like anything that flows is a stream, can be a river or a creek or a creek, anything that is defined by this, the land area that drains to a common point, it comes under different names too, but they're all watersheds. Watershed is the key fundamental term, okay, of the land area that drains to a point. But just know, just like we're here now, or, you know, let's see, got to make sure I don't get myself in trouble. I believe we're in Parkerson Mill Creek watershed here. Parkerson Mill Creek. Now that flows south. It's going to flow into Chewacla Creek, and, you know, down by the state park. And then that's going to move south and west and hit the Eufabi Creek. And that is going to flow into the Tallapoosa River right at Tuckabachie, right there below Tallahassee. And then that Tallapoosa River is going to flow down to Fort Toulouse, Wetumpka area, and meet the confluence with the Coosa and form the Alabama River. And on it goes down to Mobile. So it's a part of a huge basin. It's a part of many smaller watersheds. There's even tributaries to Parkerson Mill Creek, which is, I'm sure, where we are right now. Some little trickle that goes to Parkerson Mill, that goes to the Chewacla, that goes to Eufabi, that goes to the Tallapoosa. So that's what I mean by nested bowls, okay? Small watersheds contained in larger, out to this notion of basin. And even that's a bit arbitrary. So again, just to blow up the subjective watershed, you could go here, you could here, wherever you want to go. What is the area of land that drains to here? Well, it's going to be a little dinky thing like that. So you get my point. And keep in mind, some of that water that's coming out of the sky is going to infiltrate and go groundwater. Some will be runoff. Some will do all kinds of things. We'll get into that next week. So just to summarize what we've been talking about. This is a little bit more for next week. It gets a little technical, these hydrologic unit codes. They're really like zip codes, you know, and we'll talk more about it. But hydrologists like to know where they are, and so they got a code, you know, just like a mailman picks up an envelope. Oh, that's going to San Francisco. I know just by those 5 numbers, because we've taken the country, and the first 2 numbers are dividing our country east to west. You know, if you're out west, you have high numbers on that first number, and if you're in New York City, you have a 0 or a 1, and you just follow it. So there is a system. It's not just dartboard type random numbers. It is a system to help us understand, in one case, how to deliver the mail, in the other case, the watershed you're in. Okay, so I think this is where we'll pick it up. We've reached the end of our time. People in Rivers, it's in that second chapter. Let me just point out, I didn't read announcements. Number 1, no coordinator step forward. Number 2, by Wednesday afternoon, you've heard them ad nauseum probably. You know them all. But let me just say one very important one. In 10 minutes, right here, David Newton, Wisdom Wednesday, economic impacts of climate change. So hope some of you can stick around and see you next week. Thank you.